A tour of the lineage to which Carlos Castaneda belongs cannot be told from one layer of reality, nor in one telling. And for us to grasp but a glimpse of its wonder, it is important to suspend judgment, make a journey through time, and listen to the accounts of experience, those who were and are part of his lineage. Carlos Castaneda was initiated into a 10,000-year-old lineage by a teacher named Don Juan Matus. Don Juan was a Nahual, gifted in his ability to throw light upon perceptual possibilities outside of the human ego. His task was to prepare Carlos Castaneda to become the next Nahual. Although the next Nahual, Castaneda was the last Nahual. With him, the lineage as it was currently known, relegated to small groups of warrior apprentices led by a male leader, ended. In its place rose a new lineage, one consisting of individuals leading themselves, of persons becoming their own Nahuals, buoyed by the books, videos, and teachings Castaneda left behind, and more importantly, by their own insights from these tools. Carlos Castaneda dedicated his life to unraveling the layers of cognition available to humankind, and wanted to pay forward the gift left him by Don Juan. He understood that he was not given a guarantee to success, nor could he do that for others. Instead, he knew he was given a chance to have a chance, to go beyond ordinary perception. This is what he often told his apprentices. Quote, "I cannot take you to infinity. I cannot take you with me when I leave. What I can show you is the door. Infinity's threshold. Crossing it is up to you." And so this lineage continues today in another way, in another form. One of the most encompassing legends of Carlos Castaneda's lineage is that of the plumed serpent, the ability of the human spirit to rise to its highest peak. Carlos experienced this legend firsthand when he witnessed Don Juan and his band of warriors turning into beads of light, soaring into the night sky for their definitive journey. He writes, "At dusk that afternoon, Pablito, Nestor, and I did jump off a precipice. The Nahual's blow had been so accurate and so merciful that nothing of the momentous event of their farewell transcended beyond the limits of the other momentous event of jumping to certain death and not dying. Awe-inspiring as that event was, it was pale in comparison to what was taking place in another realm. Don Juan made me jump at the precise moment when he and all of his warriors had kindled their awareness. I had a dreamlike vision of a row of people looking at me. This was the meager interpretation of my right side awareness, overwhelmed by the awesomeness of the total event. On my left side, however, I realized that I had entered into the other self, and this entrance had nothing to do with my rationality. The warriors of Don Juan's party had caught me for an eternal instant before they vanished into the total light, before the eagle let them go through. I knew that they were in a range of the eagle's emanations which was beyond my reach. They were waiting for Don Juan and Don Genaro. I saw Don Juan taking the lead, and then there was only a line of exquisite lights in the sky. Something like a wind seemed to make the cluster of lights contract and wriggle. There was a massive glow on one end of the line of lights where Don Juan was. I thought of the plumed serpent of the Toltec legend, and then the lights were gone. Carlos Castaneda said that accomplishing this feat was the result of a lifetime of impeccability, of doing one's best, to expand oneself beyond the single reality of the day-to-day towards the infinite realities of infinity itself. For him, Don Juan, 1 had made it to the other side. French Mesoamericanist scholar Laurette Séjourné has a similar view of the importance of the plumed serpent myth. The importance of Quetzalcoatl lies in the fact that it is a central archetype in a philosophical structure in which a human being, owner of his final decisions, achieves the triumph of converting perishable mass into luminous energy. In this heroic deed, she said, lies the sovereignty that gives origin to the reign of the Toltecs, the men that, like their god, own the secret to becoming luminous energy. Castaneda's teacher, Don Juan, attributed the myth of the plumed serpent and the many other teachings to the Toltec era. Carlos Castaneda often visited the cradle of the Toltec civilization in the city of Tula to experience their traditions firsthand. Ancient Tula, as Carlos spoke of it, was one of the places where sorcerers brought their dreaming practices to perfection. He said that it was here that dreams could be perceived as real worlds, that initiates connected to their ethereal bodies and traveled to different realities long before their last definitive flight. He said that such dreamers launched themselves from atop the central pyramid of the city, where the dream guardians, the Atlantes, stood, trampolined to the nearby mountains to then plunge into other worlds. It was in Tula, he said, that the myth of Quetzalcoatl became reality. Carlos Castaneda wrote, "The Atlanteans are the Nahual. They are dreamers. They represent the order of the second attention brought forward. That's why they're so fearsome and mysterious. They are creatures of war, but not of destruction." The other row of columns, the rectangular ones, represent the order of the first attention, the tonal. They are stalkers. That's why they are covered with inscriptions. They are very peaceful and wise, the opposite of the front row. The sides of the Atlantean Pyramids are covered with sculptured and painted friezes of felines, birds of prey devouring human hearts, and human faces emerging from mouths of serpents, symbols of Quetzalcoatl from civilizations before. To the south of this temple, another pyramid houses bas-reliefs of jaguars, coyotes, and eagles, with the principal feature being a supernatural being, probably the plumed serpent, emerging as a combination of jaguar, serpent, and eagle. To the east is the Temple of the Morningstar, another name for Quetzalcoatl when aligned with the planet Venus. Thus, the remains at Tula evoke the legend in that the entire city appears dedicated to the myth of the plumed serpent. It is not hard to imagine that a population of 50,000, honoring a single belief system with a sophisticated dreaming culture, must have been magnificent indeed. Walking from the main cluster of temples at Tula along a dry, dusty, serpentine trail reveals a second of the two small museums on the anthropological grounds. In it, an interpretation in stone of Castaneda's lineage remains, testament to the dreaming abilities of the members of his line. Standing at the back of the museum, in a large, nearly meter-high glass case, is an ochre-pink stone replica of an ancient Nahual called the Death Defier. Donning a cape of feathers and with eyes fixed on infinity, this creature's right hemispheric lobe is larger than its left, signifying the immense dreaming capacity this being had. Years before, this personage stood in the first museum near its guardian companion, the dark Chakmul. Here, years before, she could be visited without a glass case, and curious passers-by would hold a finger under her nose to see if she was breathing. Many said she was. Carlos explained that the stone effigies of beings who once lived and traveled to different layers of cognition are often experienced as being alive. The same can be said of the large, dark statue of the Chakmul, which still resides in the first museum. With head facing left, it gazes, scanning the horizon, projecting itself far into the future, waiting for a call. This death defier contributed immensities to the lineage. In 1723, she met the Nawal Sebastian, exchanged energy for perception-shifting techniques, and in doing so, gave the lineage its second beginning. Before then, in fact long before the Spanish conquest, the Nawals were called Old Seers because they possessed a different attitude and motive than seers of today. Historically, Old Seers emphasized the attainment of personal gain and power over other people and nature, as Don Juan described. He said, "Ancient man knew, in the most direct fashion, what to do and how best to do it. But because he performed so well, he started to develop a sense of selfness, which gave him the feeling that he could predict and plan the actions he was used to performing. And thus, the idea of an individual self appeared, an individual self which began to dictate nature and the scope of man's actions. This, coupled with their brazen venturing into other worlds, ultimately led to their demise. Despite these flaws, the Old Seers contributed some of the most astounding discoveries to the lineage, eliciting praise from Don Juan, who said, "They learned everything by themselves through seeing. Most of the things we know in our lineage were figured out by them. The Old Seers, risking untold dangers, actually saw the indescribable force which is the source of all sentient beings. They called it the eagle, because in the few glimpses that they could sustain, they saw it as something that resembled a black and white eagle of infinite size." For all their superhuman powers, however, the Old Seers still proved no match for the Spanish conquerors, and years after Cortez's historic landing, a new line of seers began. Seers who set out to tame the ego and govern themselves understood that the Old Seers' inability to do so was the primary cause of their demise. The new seers learned and practiced perception-expanding techniques while joining society as doctors, artists, educators, merchants, and priests. As one of these new seers, the Nawal Sebastian met the old seer, the death defier, and in doing so bridged the old with new ways. Don Juan tells Carlos Castaneda that, at the time, Sebastian was a sexton at a cathedral, and that one day he met a middle-aged Indian man at the door of the church asking for energy. At first, Sebastian was dumbfounded, but later accompanied the man into the mountains. There he spent several days, and when he returned, he not only had a first-hand account of how aberrant the old seers were, but also a detailed knowledge of their techniques. Sebastian nicknamed the man the tenant, for they struck an agreement by which the man was given energy, lodging, so to speak, in exchange for favors of knowledge. For over 200 years since Sebastian, every Nawal of our line meets the tenant and decides to exchange energy for gifts of power. After Sebastian, such gifts were offered to Santisteban, Lujan, Rosendo, Elias, Julian, Don Juan Matus, Carlos Castaneda, and Carol Tiggs. Castaneda writes about his meeting this old seer in the same church as Sebastian in the final chapters of his book, Art of Dreaming. He writes, "The Nawals of Don Juan's line honored this binding agreement, creating a symbiotic relationship that changed the course and final goal of their lineage. Don Juan explained that the tenant, being a sorcerer from the old school, had learned from his teachers all the intricacies of shifting his assemblage point or perception. He knew now how to reach and hold hundreds, if not thousands, of positions of the assemblage point. His gifts were like both maps for shifting the assemblage point to specific spots and manuals on how to immobilize it on any of those positions and thus acquire cohesion. Castaneda expected the tenant to be a man, yet Don Juan tells him he will meet a woman instead. That sorcerer in there is the Death Defier. For such a sorcerer, so versed in the shifts of the assemblage point, to be a man or a woman is a matter of choice or convenience. This is the first part of the lesson in dreaming I said you were going to get. I have already said to you that to be a natural man or a natural woman is a matter of positioning the assemblage point. By natural, I mean someone who was born either male or female. To a seer, the shiniest part of the assemblage point faces outward in the case of females and inward in the case of males. The tenant's assemblage point was originally facing inward, but he changed it by twisting it around and making his egg-like energy shape look like a shell that has curled up on itself. The Death Defier escorts Carlos through her world. They move from the main altar in the church to a side altar on the left, and then outside through the church door. Carlos notices something unusual when he steps outside. That the modern-day streetlights were gone, that the only illumination was moonlight, that the facade of the church was also different and unfinished, that square blocks of limestone were everywhere, that there were no houses or buildings around the church. The Death Defier tells Carlos they are dreaming her dream and that everything around them is a product of her intention. In other words, Carlos saw her world through her eyes. He wrote, "Smiling, the woman answered my unvoiced question. She said that she was very good at visualizing because after a lifetime of doing it, she had many, many lifetimes to perfect it. She added that the town I had visited and the church where we had talked were examples of her recent visualizations. The church was the same church where Sebastian had been a sexton. She had given herself the task of memorizing every detail of every corner of that church and that town." Carlos collapses in disbelief and awakens on a bench with Carol Tiggs, the Nahual woman. She escorts him to a nearby hotel where they talk and fall asleep. He awakens to find Carol gone and to learn that she and the hotel are not real. It is all the Death Defier's dream. Carol Tiggs met the Death Defier earlier than Carlos, and her part of the story completes what we know. In the same church, in the same side chapel to the left, the ancient sorcerer sought a similar agreement with Carol Tiggs. You are dreaming inside a dream. This church doesn't exist. We are in a vacuum. The church seems to be here, but it is not. I want you to lend me a hand and free me from my chains. I don't know what I can do for you in payment for this turn. It's up to you to use me partially or fully. I will catch a ride and will go piggyback with you, and you could do the same thing with me, but it will be up to you. I have no more decisions. My life ends with your line, but it turns out that we are cyclic. I will give all the energy I have." In the encounter, Carol realizes that she, Carlos, and the Death Defier are cyclic beings. From a lecture given by Carol Tiggs in Mexico. Cyclic beings for the old sorcerers and for the old Nawal and us does not mean reincarnation. It means that human beings happen in strands held together by currents of homogeneous energy. Think of a curtain made out of beads. Each strand is individual, and each bead is even more individual, yet they are held together by the same force, the same string. The beads of the same strand could be called cyclic by the old sorcerers of the old Nawal's lineage. Carol Tiggs explains why the Death Defier remains tied to this lineage. Quote, "She said that she had been alive for thousands of years, not because she was greedy for life, but because she loved life and mankind. Her one dream, which had nothing to do with survival, was to help mankind reach a level of reason and intelligence which we do not have." The Death Defier leaves an open invitation to any being adventurous enough to evoke her name and her dream in Tula by reciting this Nahuatl song. Another of Carlos's favorite places to visit while in Mexico was the Museum of Anthropology. He and Don Juan met there many times. Amidst the cultural art of prior times, Carlos found proof of the energetic principles Don Juan was teaching him. Small figurines with hollowed chests, showing even smaller replicas of themselves inside, and a tall statue of an adolescent with a type of baby strapped to his back, exemplified the presence of the ethereal or energy body, of which Carlos writes, "Don Juan Matus explained that since time immemorial, sorcerers have given the name of energy body to a special configuration of energy, which belongs to each human being individually. He also called this configuration the dreaming body, or the double. Don Juan said the energy body is a conglomerate of energy fields, which are the mirror image of the energy fields that make up the human body when it is seen directly as energy." If you want to be very exact, Castaneda wrote, you can say that when the energy body is very close to the physical body, a sorcerer sees two luminous spheres, almost superimposed on each other. To have our energy twin close by would be our natural state, were it not for the fact that something pushes our energy body away from our physical body, starting at the very moment of our birth. And Carlos never ceased to describe the immense focus required to bring the energy body closer to the physical body, as typified in the body posture of this Olmec warrior. In another part of the museum stand other Atlantes, cyclic to Carlos's three female cohorts, Carol Tiggs, Taisha Abelar, and Florinda Donner Grau. Each statue is unique, as are his colleagues, while at the same time similar, according to their function and purpose of accompanying the Nawal and supporting the lineage. Similar to the dark Chocmool guarding the Death Defier, a large, blonde, almost white alabaster Chocmool guards the three Atlantes. This Chocmool sits in the same reclined position as the dark one, yet with head turned to right to face what has already passed. Together, both dark and light Chocmools form a pair and are said to guard the Nawal's party on their journey into the unknown. On special occasions outside of the museum, the flight of the Voladores can be witnessed. 4 young men with ropes tied to their ankles climb a tall pole and then leap head first, reminiscent of the sorcerers of antiquity, leaping from the tops of temples to the mountains into the unknown, or of Don Juan leaping from the mountaintop for his definitive flight. A trip with Carlos Castaneda to Mexico City was never complete without a visit to Cacahuamilpa Cave. With vaulted ceilings reaching hundreds of meters high, A mile-long walk from start to end, and growing stalactites and stalagmites throughout, this power spot had a tremendous significance for Carlos's line. When visited with Carlos, he spoke of nearly everything within the cave as being alive, that this cave was the first cathedral of early sorcerers, long before the pyramids were built, and carried still their intent, that to the right, at the cave's opening, as one descends the long flight of stone stairs, can be felt the magnetic presence of previous death defiers, that the stalactites and stalagmites, which never seemed to be in the same place twice, moved, for they were really ancient warriors disguised, that the vortex in the high ceiling at the end spun and spun and spun like the stars in the galaxy itself, inviting ready dreamers to leap into it as a gateway to other worlds. Hours spent in the cave always seemed like minutes, as if when visiting, one experienced a completely different sense of time, the dream time, always present when one visits Carlos Castaneda's lineage.